going to have enough food to eat, it has to be safe, because if it's not, people can end up with diarrhea, and the value of them eating food is literally gone, because it's whatever nutrients went into their body have just gone out.
Something to Chew On is a podcast devoted to the exploration and discussion of global food systems. It's produced by the Office of Research Development at Kansas State University. I'm Maureen Olevnik, Coordinator of Global Food Systems.
I'd like to welcome back our host, Dr. Jim Stack, Professor of Plant Pathology and Director of the Great Plains Diagnostic Network here at Kansas State University. How do we maintain relevant information on public health in the arena of local food producers? Is there a connection between food security and food safety? How do we make information on mitigating these challenges available? In today's podcast, we will discuss these issues and more with Dr. Londa Nwadike, Extension Associate Professor in Food Safety for Kansas State University and the University of Missouri. With a rich background in the international food system, along with a passion for food safety and human well-being, Dr. Nwadike shares her insights into today's challenges with food quality and availability.
I'd like to welcome Dr. Londa Nwadike to our podcast today. Dr. Nwadike, if you would be so kind as to give us some background on yourself, how you got interested in the area that you're working in, and how you came about coming to Kansas State University.
I grew up on a farm in South Dakota. So, and we raised corn and soybeans and had beef cattle and pigs, and my brother and I had sheep and so on when I was growing up. And I was very active in 4-H and then eventually in FFA and so on in high school. And, another thing that I'll kind of layer on as I was growing up, I guess this gives away my age, but I remember as a kid, there was a famine in Ethiopia back at the time in the 80s. And I remember, just seeing that on the news and even hearing about it, or hearing about issues like that, like at church and that sort of thing. And I just remember thinking wow, I want to do something to help that situation, and kind of thinking about, my idyllic childhood, growing up in this farm and we produce all this food and yet thinking, why are there people starving in other places in the world? So I've always kind of had that, I guess, in my head. And so I did my undergrad at South Dakota State University and I double majored in animal science and food science. And while I was there, I was really fortunate to be, I met a lot of people that, eventually came to K-State, incidentally. But Fred Cholick and Don Boggs and Marty Draper. Well, I guess I didn't meet Marty so much. But anyway, I got to meet a lot of people at SCSU. And I was involved in some kind of food systems leadership initiatives as an undergrad. And so kind of started to get exposed to international agriculture and food systems and so on. So I was a meats judger at SCSU. I was on our meats judging team. And I think that's when I first really started to hear about Kansas State University. And, I remember we were at a national contest and Dr. Melvin Hunt in animal science came over to me and was visiting with me and, basically recruited me to come to K-State to do my master's degree in meat science. So I came to Manhattan. I was there from 2000 to 2002 and did my MS in meat science. Curtis Kastner was my major professor, and Melvin Hunt and Don Croft and Randy Phoebus were on my committee as well. So a lot of, I think personally, of course, greats in the kind of meat science world and food science at K-State were my mentors back then. So, and while I was at K-State, I kept, I still had this interest kind of in international agriculture and international food systems things and so on. And I went to the World Food Prize event in Des Moines. I had a friend in Des Moines. I can't remember the details. I was going from one place to another, and I was stayed at her house overnight in Des Moines. And she said, well, you should come to the World Food Prize. And so I did. And I remember when I was there, and I think it was the first year of the World Food Prize, if I remember, it was like maybe, I don't remember which year it was. But anyway, I remember it was one of the first years they had it. And I happened to meet somebody there who, I don't remember if they worked for FAO or they knew somebody that did, but they'd heard, I connected with somebody there about the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. And so then that person, helped me find a job at FAO and or an opening at FAO. So I applied. And then, some of you might remember back in 2001, September 11 of 2001 happened. So I applied for this job, before September 11 of 2001. And then September 11 happened and I kind of forgot about the job almost and just thought that's not going to happen anymore. And then suddenly out of the blue, I get an email that I was hired for the job, and I didn't have an interview or anything. I just, was hired. It was amazing experience. So anyway, I worked for FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN in Rome, Italy from 2002 to 2006. So I was there for 4 years, and I worked in food safety capacity building. So group that kind of supported the work of the Codex Alimentarius. So, we did we helped develop publications and toolkits and did, I helped organize conferences and workshops and things like that across the world. The area I was really hired to work in, so I was paid by sorry, I hope I'm not saying too many details or whatever. I could go on and on. But I was hired really to work and this is how I got to meet Jim Stack. I was hired to work in the area of what at the time was called biosecurity. So it was kind of the FAO's terminology for it at the time was kind of the integration of food safety, animal health, and plant health. So kind of how those three entities work together and could, if countries would better integrate those, how each of those could be strengthened by working together. So that's what I was hired to do at FAO and worked a lot in that area. And then, specifically in the area of food safety capacity building. So that was, 2002 to 2006. And then while I was very fortunate to travel to many countries across the world. I think 52 countries or something like that. If I remember correctly, that I visited while I was there, which was, an amazing experience. And as I was traveling, I realized, I'd always been kind of thinking about continuing my education, getting a PhD. And then as I was traveling, I thought, I just felt called to work kind of in the public health area, like this kind of intersection between agriculture and public health. I had some training and grew up kind of on the agriculture side. And I realized something I was interested in was really helping people prevent disease and prevent different conditions, that are not beneficial to people's health. So then I also I worked actually through my church in Malawi for 6 months. So that was before I came back to the US. But so, that experience too, just kind of solidified, I really wanted to study more about health. So one day I just Googled agriculture, public health. Like I just knew I wanted to do something kind of in that intersection. And I ended up at the University of Iowa for my PhD in agricultural public health, basically. And I was still very interested in international things. So I ended up doing my PhD research in the Gambia in West Africa. So I worked with women vegetable farmers and worked more in the area of occupational health for my PhD. As sometimes that's how things just work out. I was kind of intending to do more food safety related, but it ended up being occupational health. So I did my research there, and then I ended up marrying somebody that I met in the Gambia, and then it just worked out for us to move back to the U.S. at the time. So when I was applying for jobs after my PhD, I graduated, I think 2010, and, the economy wasn't great at the time. And so there wasn't tons of jobs. And so I was fortunate to get a job at the University of Vermont as a state extension food safety specialist and really enjoyed my time there. So I was there for 3 years and just really learned a lot, and it was a great experience. And, got to learn more about their kind of local food systems in Vermont and worked a lot with small scale food processors and so on, which was great. So but I always kind of wanted to get closer back to South Dakota, to home. And then Curtis Kastner alerted me to job openings at K-State. And so then I applied for the position I'm currently in. Sorry, that was maybe a long track to how I got to my current position at K-State. So then I applied for this position, and it was the position I'm in currently. It's a new position. It was a new position at the time. University of Missouri and Kansas State University had not had a consumer food safety extension specialist. Neither one had had a person in that field for maybe 10 years or something like that. And my understanding is Paula Peters, who was my supervisor at the time at K-State, and then Joe Britt Rankin on the Missouri side was my supervisor when I started. They'd been meeting at regional meetings and kind of had been talking about, they both had this need for a consumer extension food safety specialist. And I believe in Minnesota and North Dakota, they have a joint position in the Fargo area, but it was just covering the Fargo area. But they had, there was kind of a precedent for two states to work together in the area of extension. So my understanding is that, K-State and University of Missouri kind of somewhat modeled, the paperwork for my position after that. And so in 2013, I moved here to K-State in University of Missouri. And this joint position, it's a state extension food safety specialist. So half my salary and everything is paid by Missouri, and then half is paid by K-State. And so I'm housed in the Kansas City area then to be centrally located between the two states. Yeah, I think so. Well, I'll stop with that, but can happily share more as needed.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. That was absolutely not too much. It was very, very interesting background, and you've seen and experienced obviously a lot of things dealing with the food system internationally. Okay, I'll get this question out of the way right at the get-go. Now, when football games get going between K-State and Missouri, do you feel a bit conflicted?
I have to admit, it's interesting. I hadn't been here very long in my job, and then K-State and MU played in Kansas City in basketball. And I remember we went, and it was at the Sprint Center, and so it was a great environment. But we're recording this, so I will not make any comments. But I will say, when I first started, it was interesting that a lot of people told me like it would never work if it was KU and MU, and it would probably never work if it was K-State and KU, that it was a joint position between the two. And of course, I think that's changed over time. There's a lot more collaboration than there probably used to be. But yes, I think that K-State and MU are both land grants, and we're, both very similar. And I think, they really kind of have similar roles. They understand each other. So, but yes, on the athletic field, I'll just be quiet today.
Fair enough. So you mentioned how the two universities are similar. How are they different from one another? Clearly you deal with a lot of state regulatory issues and getting information out on those. And I'm guessing that there are major differences between Missouri and Kansas in that area.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, there's a ton of things I could talk about related to that. I'll start with the food safety regulation side. So Missouri is what we call a home rule state. So Missouri has, the local public health departments, they can set their own regulations. They cannot be less strict than the state. The state regulations are the baseline, but they can be more strict. So every county or city in Missouri could potentially have different food safety regulations, which is very challenging for my job because I feel very bad because I just have to tell people, talk to your local public health department because, I cannot keep track of the regulations for, there's 112 counties in Missouri, and some of those counties have the same regulations, but the answer is always talk to your local public health department. Before I started at Kansas, my understanding was there was more like a little bit more localized. It was under the Department of Health, and there was maybe a little bit more localized. I don't know if regulation is the right term, but maybe enforcement of rules before I started. But thankfully, since I've been here at K-State since 2013, the regulations are the same across the entire state, which makes it so much easier for my job. I can put out publications saying, these are the food safety regulations for Kansas. And it's the same across the state, but it's harder in Missouri because we have to, have all these caveats and tell people, talk to your local public health department every time. So that's a big difference on the regulatory side. And there's just the structure of, in Kansas, it's a little bit simpler too, because Kansas Department of Ag regulates everything related to food safety, meat, as well as produce, as well as restaurants and so on. But in Missouri Department of Health regulates restaurants, and Missouri Department of Ag regulates meat and dairy and produce, so it's divided out differently. I saw that in my international work too. It was always interesting how things were divided. Every country is divided out a little bit differently, how they regulate things. So, and yeah, university wise, MU is unique, different than K-State in that it has a law school and a med school, within the same system. And MU's system, and I don't know the right terminology, so I won't use the terminology, but the University of Missouri St. Louis, University of Missouri Kansas City, their relationship is a little different with Columbia than like the relationship of K-State. Well, of course, we have the Olathe campus and the Salina campus, but anyway, they're just, the structures are a little bit different, how they're kind of set up with the different universities and so on. So, but yeah, there's definitely, I can always see there's something on this side that's working well, and maybe it's not working as well on the other side. And so, how can we try to learn from one side or the other on improving things? So yeah, I think there's been a lot of benefit. And, we can, if we have a good idea on one side that's worked well on one side, then, we can just bring it over to the other side and try to adapt it to that side. Like one example of that, we're actually doing it this week on the Missouri side. We've been doing webinars for farmers market vendors and direct to consumer sales in Kansas. We've been doing them since 2014. We used to do them in person. Now we do them online on a webinar. But then we hadn't been doing that quite the same on the Missouri side. And I said, well, we can do it there too. So you can kind of use the same model on one that works on one side and translate it to the other side. And it's been worked pretty well.
Your breadth of experience is really impressive on the food side. And I'm guessing it affords you some insight into some of these food challenges that a lot of us probably don't have. Let's start out with a simple question, I think. I don't know. How tight is the relationship between food safety and food security?
Yeah, that's a great question. I remember when I was at FAO, in fact, back in the day, I wrote a paper on that, and then it was something that was, I was, involved in drafting it, I'll say. And then, it was presented at one of, I think Conference on Agriculture or something like that, one of our big conferences that we had. For me, there's, extremely tight relationship. And, the definition of food security actually includes that food is safe for people to consume. And, if people are going to have enough food to eat, it has to be safe, because if it's not, people can end up with diarrhea, and the value of them eating food is literally gone, because it's whatever nutrients went into their body have just gone out. Obviously, worse consequences can happen if people are consuming unsafe food. I mean, it can be worse than just having diarrhea. I mean, it can be even death or hospitalizations from that. So for me, if people don't have safe food, it's really, unfortunately, it's really not of value. But I mean, it's a hard trade-off, because, when you don't have enough food to eat, people will eat whatever is available. And I remember when I was at FAO, there was a case of, and Maureen would probably know way more about this than I do, but I remember there was a case of like severe mycotoxin poisoning, and like people acutely died from mycotoxin poisoning, which typically it's a long-term chronic effect if you're consuming too much mycotoxins. But there was, and I don't remember the numbers anymore, but, a lot of people died from that because they were, the grain was moldy and they didn't have anything else to eat. So they ate it and they ended up not surviving that. So, and just the shelf life of food too is really important for food security. In addition to making sure that people don't get sick from it, if it spoils, and people aren't able to eat it, that's of, not of much value either. So yeah, like without having safe food, to me, there really people really aren't food secure if they don't have safe food. But I'll just say too, in fact, a topic that's kind of at the top of people's mind in the U.S. today. I mean, this is not just an issue around the world. I feel like in the past, we thought of food security as probably more of an issue in like developing countries. But, because of COVID and because of inflation of food prices right now, and sometimes we just don't see eggs at the grocery store anymore. You don't see particular food products. People are more aware of the acuteness of food insecurity here in the U.S. too. But anyway, making sure that that the food that people are eating is safe, and that people aren't eating moldy food or old food, because that's the only thing that's available. It's hard to, when you're hungry. My husband grew up in Nigeria. And so when you're hungry, it's, when you find food, you eat it. Like that's the natural reaction. But, sometimes it does cause more harm than good if it's going to make you sick. So it's a tough question. Yeah.
Yeah, just to follow up on that. So when we look at my views on food security and constantly evolve, and kind of at the point where we often express it as a global food security challenge. I don't believe we have one. I think we have a family of local food security issues spread around the planet, and that they're not all caused by the same thing, and that we need a family of solutions, not a solution. And until we kind of get that to sink in, I'm not sure that we'll make the progress that we're hoping for. I was just wondering what your comment might be on that.
Yeah, again, from my perspective, you're exactly right. Like the challenge is not, uniform across the entire globe by any means. The challenges are unique. I mean, there's similarities between the challenges, of course, like lack of electricity for good cold storage, for example. That's kind of a pervasive challenge, or just lack of good options for drying grain or whatever it might be. But there's so many layers to the challenges, I guess, that you definitely have to think about addressing all the different challenges, not just like, so one blanket solution will not take care of it by any means. No. And that's why, for me, I feel like a food systems approach is so important, to have numerous perspectives on the issue, and not just thinking, like me as a food microbiologist, well, I'm not really a food microbiologist, but me as, kind of working in the food safety space, like, that's not the only answer to the problem. We also need wheat breeders. We also need, people to process the food or whatever. So yeah, we definitely need to all work together because yeah, the challenges are complex. And so yeah, the issues have to be addressed. You kind of alluded to it, like in a culturally appropriate way, definitely. Again, with my husband being from Nigeria, I'm certainly not an expert on Nigeria by any means, but, just kind of learning from him, you realize, okay, what works in that country might not work in another country. Like it's just, the realities are just different, and the way people behave is just different. And so yeah, addressing the challenges in a culturally appropriate way is really important too.
I mean, the challenges are also bringing together different groups that both have a bearing on an outcome, yet historically they don't work together very well. And I'm wondering, your experience in the Gambia, getting from Ziguinchor to Dakar, you either have to drive around to Tambacounda or you have to wait until there's a ferry to take you across the Gambia River. They tried for decades to build a bridge across the Gambia River, but Gambia is a former British territory, and Senegal a former French colony, and they just could never get together to build a bridge that would benefit both countries. I'm wondering, how do you bring people together that actually need to contribute to a solution?
Jim, I didn't realize that you knew so much about the Gambia. I'm so impressed. Wow, I didn't realize that.
My postdoc was in Senegal.
Oh, cool. I did not realize that. That's very cool. Yes. So yes, very well the situation there. So yes, definitely challenging. Boy, it's if I had the answer to that, we would have world hunger solved. we would have world peace solved, I guess. I mean, boy, I'm certainly not an expert on that sort of thing, but I do think it's important to, at whatever level we're working at, that we try to bring different groups together, and in whatever our sphere of influence is. I feel like it is good for us to recognize different people have different perspectives, and there's different and understandably, they have different motivations, different economic interests, political interests, whatever it might be. And again, I wish I was better at this, but, really being able to help people to understand, we all have a common goal here. We would all benefit from this. We could try to look at what we have in common and how we could benefit instead of, one side thinking, I'm going to lose if this happens. So nope, it's not going to happen. But, trying to think of how we can all benefit in some way, rather than people focusing on what I'm going to lose, we can focus on what you might gain from that benefit as well. And yeah, it's a tough issue, unfortunately. But yeah, I feel like that's, just to reiterate that, just the concept of working together is beneficial in whatever sphere of influence you have. And I just read something recently too about, sometimes it's important to bring your critics into the conversation. We often just want to hear from people that agree with us or support our ideas. But if we really want to move forward, we have to have all voices and listen to all voices and try to make sure that we're incorporating all those voices. Yeah.
You and Jim have talked about and identified a lot of challenges internationally, and some of the things that you deal with in areas where food availability is a huge issue. Where do you see the big challenges around? I mean, you're an extension, Kansas and Missouri, and you deal with a lot of local challenges. Where do you see the biggest problems or issues in these areas?
Yeah, boy, that's a good question. This is maybe just kind of an example I'm just thinking of from my own life. Just this morning, I needed to get some more apples. My kids have been eating a lot of apples lately, which is great. We need to eat healthier. But I was thinking, I'd really like to buy more from, our local producers. But it's just easier for me to go to the grocery store and pick up apples. And, who knows where those apples have come from. And prices are going up. I'm not an expert on that. I'm not an economist, but, I was just thinking, and I mean, I think about it when I go shopping at the grocery store, it's really cheaper to buy junk food in the US. And, in other countries, fruits and vegetables are cheaper, generally speaking. And in the US, it's expensive to buy fruits and vegetables. And again, I'm not an expert on, all the dollar amounts and so on, but so I just feel like, how can we make it easier so that when I go to the grocery store, I can buy, apples that were grown 20 miles from my house, instead I'm buying apples grown who knows how many miles from my house. But, when I go to my local apple orchard, I should buy a huge container of apples because I know I'm going to eat that many apples, but I don't have a great place to store them at home. And, so this is just me, but then thinking about people that, don't have that, it's harder for them to be able to afford buying local food. And so how do we help them to be able to afford healthy food, to help support our local farmers. And then, there's a lot of people that, and I mean, I don't do as good of a job as I should, but, there's a lot of people too that don't understand the value of buying from our local farmers, just go to the grocery store and buy whatever's there. And, don't always think about I should support my local farmer as much as I can. So, and actually we got a regional food systems partnership grant from USDA recently. And one of the things that we're planning to do as part of that grant is to be able to help do more education of consumers on the value of buying local food and on the value of you're going to spend money on food anyway, and maybe it'll be a little bit more to buy it from a local source, and maybe it won't be quite as convenient. I won't be able to just stop at a grocery store on my way to the office, but it's still valuable to buy, from that local farmer if possible. And so this is a number of different things coming together, but, then how can we help our local farmers to be able to get their produce into the grocery store to make it more convenient for people to buy from them, rather than just buying, whatever is there. So, again, like we talked about, that's going to take a lot of different people working together and a lot of different angles working together on that issue of, and I'm using the example of apples, but the same is true with meat and with grain products or whatever. How can we bring all the different players together? So look, farmers in Kansas, they might be producing food to feed the rest of the world, and that's great. And but we also can think about helping feed Kansans, and that they're not competing with each other, like that these aren't competing goals, but like we can hopefully work together and we can promote Kansas agriculture in all different levels, and different markets that they're selling to. So sorry, that was a lot of rambling maybe, but yeah, I don't know. That's one of the challenges that I can think of personally at the moment.
Very good. I, for the last couple of years, been working with a relatively new group in Manhattan area called the Manhattan Riley County Food and Farm Council. We've gotten that thing established and hopefully on solid footing at this point in time. Do you do much interaction? I know that there are food and farm councils in a variety of areas around the state, probably in Missouri as well. Do you do much work with those groups?
Honestly, like our local food council, I'm peripherally involved, but I try to remind myself I cover all of Kansas and all of Missouri. Like I don't just cover Kansas City. So I try to spend my time, serving all of the two states if possible. So I honestly haven't been super involved in our local food policy council because of that. But actually, again, part of our regional food systems partnership grant, we do have a subcontract with the Kansas Food Action Network, which is kind of can't think of the right term, but, they're kind of an umbrella a little bit over state food policy councils in Kansas. And so we will be working with them and, trying to think through, should we have a statewide food policy council in Kansas, or, what would that, or how can we better support food policy council? So actually this new grant that we just got will be doing some work, working with food policy councils across Kansas. I will say Missouri does have some food policy councils, but Kansas really quite, and I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but quite often Kansas leads the nation in terms of like numbers of food policy councils per capita. The Kansas Health Foundation has done such a great job over the years of really promoting food policy councils in the state, that Kansas really does a great job in terms of the number of food policy councils we have. California and Michigan might have more food policy councils, but they also have more people living there. So Kansas really does a great job of having a lot of local food policy councils. So we, in the Missouri side, they have, some kind of similar things as well. So I try to be at least like peripherally involved or make sure that others within Extension are working with them. And so that's something that, we working at the state level and Extension would, encourage our local Extension personnel to try to be involved in their local food policy councils, as much as they can too. Yeah. Because I think that there's a lot of good that can come out of them.
So from the consumer's perspective, when you go to the grocery store to buy your food, you're making assumptions about those products with respect to standards for quality and safety. What about the assumptions? What assumptions can be made about those quality and safety standards when that food is coming from a local supplier instead of kind of going through a commercial chain?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we definitely talk about that a lot. We have developed some materials like for consumers. In fact, one of the first fact sheets I developed when I was here at K-State was kind of food safety tips for people shopping at farmers markets. So not to say that the food is inherently less safe or inherently more safe when it comes from a local, like a farmers market or a local channel. The important thing is that people are using safe practices, no matter what channel they're selling through, and no matter what channel you're buying through. You're exactly right. When we go to a grocery store, we know that the grocery store has a vested interest in making sure that the food they're selling is safe. They don't want liability concerns. So they usually will have more checks and so on. But like this fact sheet that we developed back in 2013 or 2014 or whatever, it kind of talks about like you as a consumer have to do a little more of that than And so really what you can do as a consumer is you can just ask questions of especially at like a farmer's market. That's the whole idea, is that you can interact with the person that's growing the fruits and vegetables or meat or whatever it is, so you can ask them questions. And again, this actually kind of has some kind of tips for things you can look for, making sure there's not nicks or cuts or bruises in the product, and that it's kept cold if it needs to be kept cold. And those sort of things are kind of, tips that the consumer can do. Some local food venues, some farmers markets the manager will go out and do inspections, but quite often the manager is looking just to make sure that that's actually being raised there and they're not buying it in. If the market is a producers only market, the manager might be checking on that too. So yeah, you're right. When you're buying locally, if you're not buying through a grocery store, then you as the consumer, have to take a little more onus, I guess, to can ask some questions about food safety if you haven't bought from that person before, and using your eyes for clues of things, and that's why in extension, we really are trying to really reach as many produce growers and food processors and so on as possible, with helping them with training and information related to food safety, so that they are producing a safe product, so that Kansas consumers can feel safe and comfortable going to different a local market or whatever to buy their produce or buy their food, so they can feel like it's they have more confidence that it would be safe. Yeah.
Does FDA or USDA compile statistics to at least make it easier to make that case that the prevalence of food safety issues are no different local versus what you get out of the grocery store, or what those numbers might be?
Part of the challenge is that, and again, Maureen could speak to this a lot more than I can probably, but part of the challenge is that, like, when a large food manufacturer or a large food distributor is distributing food, then just more food is getting distributed. So the likelihood that more people are going to eat that food is higher. And if there is a problem, more people are going to get sick. And then, it'll rise to the level of that we can trace back, what all those people, like we have a big number of people getting sick, and then we can trace back, it was this product that made them sick. The challenge is when, it's a smaller producer, fewer people are eating that food. So, maybe one person out of 100 that ate it would get sick, whereas, and then it's really hard to trace back what made them sick. So, if 100,000 people are eating a food product, if 10% of them get sick, then, that's 10,000 people that are getting sick. 10,000 people will show up on the radar, and we'll find out like, this product made them sick. So unfortunately, it's hard to be able to trace back if there is a problem with food that's being produced in smaller units. It's just harder to trace that back. So it's hard to have good statistics to really compare apples to apples. Like it's hard to know if there is issues. And unfortunately, there is issues sometimes with foods that are sold at farmers markets, or foods that are sold through smaller channels. I mean, it does happen. And I often tell producers, like, the microorganisms don't care if it's sold in this venue or sold in that venue. Like, everybody has to use safe practices. So I'll just say it's hard to have good data to really show if there's more issues in different marketplaces, because it's just hard to compare. But we know that it can happen, no matter what venue you're buying your food in, and no matter where you're selling your food, I guess. So yeah, again, that's why we really try to educate people, just use safe practices as much as possible.
Yeah, this discussion takes me back a long ways to previous lives, but it brings to mind exactly what happens in large scale production is always know your supplier. If there's ever anything that you drill into the heads of large companies that you're working with, is know your supplier, and, find out who they are, what their practices are, how they produce and get the materials to you in a safe format. So it's it's a whole different scale, but it's kind of the same thing, is understanding and having some trust in who you're buying from.
So yeah, I just was going to say, that's why, if you go to the local farmers market, like, you can talk to the person that you're buying from. If you're going to a supermarket, you can know the supermarket, and sometimes supermarkets will show like, and some supermarkets do, promote local produce or local meats or whatever, and they'll maybe have a little more information on the person that's producing the food. But if you're, as a consumer, going to the supermarket, your supplier is the supermarket. And, but if you're shopping at like the farmer's market, you can know who the farmer is.
Yeah. Another question that I had about availability of quality fruits and vegetables. When you see reports and information coming out of, say, Western Kansas or central and Western Kansas areas that are very rural, the availability of fresh fruits and vegetables is very low. People eat foods that come out of Dollar General stores or things like that are highly processed. How do you, from an extension perspective, how do you promote and try to expand local farmers growing in those areas and those regions, trying to keep some supply of fresh foods available?
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, like we talked about before, that's why it's so important to work as part of a team. Like, I certainly cannot give advice on how to grow fruits and vegetables. Man, my backyard is pathetic. That's why, like our local foods, our K-State Extension local foods transdisciplinary team, for example, like, we have some horticulture production people in that team, for example, and we as a whole, try to help provide, some of those resources to people across the state. Like in Kansas City, we have a program called Growing Growers, which is, and it's now, and Rebecca McMahon in Wichita has also kind of started that program in Wichita. It's mostly with fruit and vegetable producers, but, to help fruit and vegetable producers just learn more about production and so on. And before COVID, we did, the Growing Growers, we do a series of workshops, in the Kansas City area on, kind of key topics. And so I'm part of that planning committee. So I teach, the food safety and post-harvest handling workshop, but then other colleagues will teach, integrated pest management, and they'll teach soils, and they'll teach, all the different farm business, all those different aspects. Before COVID, we did that in person always. And then COVID drove us to put more of that online. And so we're actually, my colleague Carrie Rivard is in the process now of getting that material into a more online format so that we can, extend that knowledge across the state. You don't have to come to an in-person workshop in Wichita or Kansas City. You can, wherever you live, you can access that information. So yeah, we are trying to do, some initiatives like that to try to help with that production. And yeah, obviously growing up on a farm, there's so many things that have to be in place. You have to have the soil and the water, of course. And, I won't go into those details, but you need to have, those inputs in place. And then you need the equipment. And then, so you have to be able to grow it. And then, you have to be able to market it and have a marketing channel as well. So again, that's why a team is important, to be able to provide all those resources to growers, to help farmers in different parts of the state to be able to produce more fruits and vegetables, to be able to help provide healthier food choices across the entire state. We try to do again, before COVID, we did these farmers market / direct to consumer workshops. We would do them in person. We would try to, go to locations across the state, and then COVID drove it online. And then, now we've continued with that, and it actually works well for people that are geographically more, remote, than they can, as long as they have internet at home, which sometimes is a challenge too. But, as they have internet, then they can access, more information and don't have to, drive so far to get that information.
Being in an academic institution, one of our major challenges is to ensure we have the workforce adequately trained for the future. How do you see the opportunities here for students in this area, and how are we doing bringing young people into this area?
I'm housed in Olathe, and, so I'm not housed in Manhattan, and I'm not technically in an academic unit. Like I'm really in extension. So anyway, but I'm in the Food Science Institute. So I know what happens in food science. I don't know about other departments because I'm not in those departments, but I know that, enrollments are dropping, generally speaking. And again, I'm not an expert on the statistics, but, we actually, and just an example from from my own experience, we have an urban food systems program here in Olathe, and it's also available in Manhattan. And so, in the past, it was just a master's degree that students could get in the topic of urban food systems, which again, to me is more food systems. It's not necessarily, there's an urban element to it, but to me, the important part is the food systems, and that's, relevant to rural areas and urban areas. They have a certificate program in urban food systems, and that is available completely online now because all the courses due to COVID were put online. And so, so there's that means of being able to have more education for people, even if you're place bound, you can still get some more education in that area. So that's one, kind of newer option that's available to help do that. What's the right term? Workforce development, like you said. And yeah, I could see in my own kids, like my oldest is 11, and she is, I grew up on a farm, and she's first generation removed from the farm, and and I know that, we have lots of her friends are probably much further removed from the farm than she is. And sometimes the things that she says, I think, oh my goodness. So I realized, boy, I needed to be doing a better job about educating my kids about where food comes from and where there's potential job opportunities. And we all need to work together to make sure we have enough food to eat. And you can get a good job in that someday. My 11-year-old's already worrying about what she's going to do when she grows up. And I think, oh, there's so many opportunities for you. So, I give kudos to Kansas Ag in the Classroom and other 4-H and other programs that really are trying to help just continually educate students that there are good jobs in agriculture. There's a whole range of good jobs and not just this type of job that you might think, there's so many different things you can do related to that. So yeah, I think it's a good reminder for all of us to keep sharing that message that there are, to our kids. And again, we've talked about this recently, it's not just starting with kids when they're in high school. Starting with kids when they're, elementary school and middle school, sharing with them, there's good jobs, you can make a difference, you can help feed more people. And, K-State's a great place to go to school. So just sharing that message, I think with students is really important because again, I'm not an expert on the enrollment trends, but I know, like food science, for example, I think it's, it's the trend is going the wrong way in terms of the number of students that are enrolled. So, yeah.
I enjoyed the conversation immensely. These are pretty serious issues for society in general. The challenges are significant. On the other hand, just as you've expressed, Londa, I look at them as more opportunities to dedicate your career to something meaningful. So I agree. We could probably do a better job reaching out to young people to let them know about these opportunities. But yeah, thanks for the conversation. Very much enjoyed it, Londa.
Well, thank you again. And thank you, Jim, for joining us. As usual, it was a great conversation.
Yeah, nice to visit with you all. I enjoyed it too.
If you have any questions or comments you would like to share, check out our website at ksu.edu/research/global food and drop us an email. Our music was adapted from Wayne Gowen's album, Chronicles of Carmela. Special thanks to him for providing that to us. Something to Chew On is produced by the Office of Research Development at Kansas State University.